We're in part 4 of our series called Enemies of the Heart, where we've been talking about 4 powerful emotions that compete for control of our hearts. Our topic today is envy. Can you think of the last time that you experienced envy? I remember a few years ago, my wife came home from dropping off my son at a birthday party. When she walked in the door, she looked at me and she said, "Clint, we got to get a bigger house. We also need newer cars and new furniture. And speaking of furniture, we need more throw pillows. Like, we don't have enough throw pillows." And that's when I kind of stepped in. Whenever she starts talking about throw pillows, I know I got to step in. So I said, "What are you talking about? You know that we can't afford all that." And that's when she confessed what was happening. She said, "I just dropped Caden off at his friend's house, and it's so amazing that it's inspired me to want to have amazing things too." I said, "Honey, that's not inspiration. That's envy. And you're now not allowed to go back to that house. Let me go and pick up Caden from the party." So a few hours later, I showed up to their house thinking that I would respond differently because I was more mature and level-headed. I'm not going to struggle with petty jealousy. But boy, was I wrong. As soon as I drove up, I immediately felt exactly what Diane was feeling. I mean, this house, it had everything. A giant swimming pool that overlooked the valley, a full-size basketball court with outdoor floodlights, a massive 10-car garage, an outdoor kitchen with one of those built-in barbecues next to a brand new Traeger, a perfectly manicured lawn with those zigzag lines so you know it's freshly mowed. They even had a custom-made bouncy house for all the kids that they were playing on with an attached water slide that was like 2 stories tall. I mean, their house had everything. It was incredible. When I got home, I told Diane, "You're absolutely right. I want amazing things too. Get on Zillow right now. Let's find a new house." Well, we eventually came to our senses and settled down. And of course, we didn't buy a new house, although we did go to the store and get some new throw pillows. But the point of that story is that envy, it comes for all of us. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how young or old you are, how mature you are, how level-headed you think you are, how rich or poor or successful or unsuccessful you might be. Eventually, that feeling of jealousy will rear its ugly head in our hearts. This has been the case ever since the beginning. Starting in Genesis, we see envy play a feature role in the story of human hearts. Cain was jealous of his brother Abel. Esau was jealous of Jacob. Joseph's older brothers were jealous of the jacket that his dad gave him. Even Cowboy Woody, Andy's favorite toy, got jealous when Buzz Lightyear showed up. See, envy comes for all of us, but we don't really talk about it. Because out of the 4 enemies of the heart that we've discussed in this series, envy is probably the most embarrassing to admit to. We can build a case for our anger. We can admit to our fears. We can even come clean when we're struggling with greed. But envy, that seems a bit petty, a bit immature. Like, no, I graduated from those feelings of jealousy after high school. So we don't talk about it. We might not even acknowledge to ourselves that we struggle with it. But the problem is, we still feel it. We feel it when someone else gets the job that we were going for. We feel it when our neighbor comes home with that brand new car. We feel it when we're on Instagram looking at someone else's vacation photos. We feel it when we see that guy at the beach who's also wearing a tank top, except their biceps fill it out a little bit more than ours. We feel it when our teammate gets playing time ahead of us. We feel it when our sister-in-law fits into that dress that we couldn't, or when our friend from high school is more successful than we are. We even feel it when we see a man who's over 40 years old and has a full, thick head of flowing hair and no receding hairline. Okay, maybe that's just me. Now, we might not like to admit it, but envy lives in all of our hearts. And it might seem somewhat harmless compared to other feelings, but do not be fooled. Envy can become a major cancer in our lives. Proverbs 14:30 says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." That word picture captures it perfectly. Envy rots the bones. It slowly decays the love and the joy and the peace that we have in our hearts. And that's not all. Envy also rots our relationships. It's extremely hard to love our neighbor as ourselves when we want what our neighbor has for ourselves. When we're jealous of someone, we don't love them, we don't root for them, we don't try to be on their side. No, we root against them. We secretly wish they'd fail or fall or at least suffer a setback because that feels good. That alleviates the pain a little bit. When we find out the rich guy down the street is actually deep in debt, or the player on the team who started over us misses the wide open layup, it kind of feels good. Even though we know it shouldn't feel good, envy causes us to celebrate others' setbacks. But we know that doesn't solve the problem. Celebrating other people's failures doesn't ultimately fix our pain. No, in fact, it actually makes it worse. When we allow jealousy to flow unchecked in our hearts, eventually what happens is it turns into resentment. We go from rooting against them to actually despising them. Because in order to make the sting of jealousy go away, we need to justify it somehow. And so that's what we do. But see, when this happens, it gets out of control. It spreads like wildfire. Now it has the power to not just sour our attitudes towards one person, but towards entire groups and categories of people. All of a sudden, we find ourselves despising all rich people, or all corporate executives, or all guys who look good in tank tops, or all people who wear name brand clothes, or all people who go on extravagant vacations a lot, or all people who have their doctorate degree, or all people who are happily married, or all people with nice hair. Oh, wait, that's just me again. Now, can I make a confession with you guys? I remember when I was a youth pastor, I used to compare the size of my youth group to other youth groups, like when we go to camps with other churches. In my mind, I'd always look to see who brought the most students. I knew this had become a major problem when I was looking at another church's camp photo on Instagram, and I literally started counting their students on the screen. Yeah, I know, it was out of control. But that wasn't even the main issue. The issue was that the jealousy towards these bigger youth groups turned into resentment towards all big youth groups. And because my resentment needed justification, in my mind, instead of being happy that more kids were coming to Jesus, I started justifying my feelings by making up these false narratives and lies about these bigger youth groups. Like, yeah, the bigger the group, the shallower it is. Oh, those students, they just go to that church to have fun, not to grow or to learn about God. Or those youth pastors, they have such big egos. They're not in it for the students. They just want to be on a stage in front of lots of people. They're just using this as a platform or a stepping stone to what's next in their career. It got ugly. I told you this stuff is embarrassing to talk about. I'm just glad I'm not a youth pastor anymore, so now I don't struggle with jealousy. Oh, wait, it's still there, right at the surface of my 41-year-old heart. And I bet you have it too. So let me ask you, where has envy led to resentment in your life? What groups of people do you find yourself tearing down and picking apart in order to justify that jealousy? Maybe it's corporate executives. You say they're slimy or narcissistic or fake, but ask yourself, where did that start? Where did that stem from? Was it because somewhere along the lines that's what you wanted to be, but someone else got the role that you were hoping for? So now you justify that jealousy by pointing out everything that's wrong and crooked and unethical about corporate executives? Or maybe it's people who go to the gym a lot. When you see their pictures online, you justify the jealousy by thinking, who has the time to work out that much? They must not have kids or full-time jobs or a social life. They must be starving themselves. They must be miserable. Where do these thoughts come from? Is it really them that's miserable? Or is it us? How long will we allow envy and resentment to rot our bones and ruin our relationships? Well, the good news is there's a solution. There's a remedy. But before we talk about that, let's dig a little deeper to see what's fueling all this envy in the first place. If you have a Bible or a Bible app, open up to James chapter 4. James is in the New Testament. almost to the very end of the Bible, right before the book of Hebrews. Right after the book of Hebrews and before the letters of Peter. James chapter 4, we're going to start right in verse 1. James, the brother of Jesus, says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight." Okay, so according to Jesus' brother James, all of this envy is fueled by one thing: our desires. He says we covet, we quarrel, we fight. Why? Because we're not getting what we want. We're not getting what we desire. And that's what this is all about. That's what this all roots towards. Now, that's not a groundbreaking thought or truth. You're probably thinking to yourself, I already knew that. I already knew I'm jealous of my neighbor because he has the truck that I want. But let's dig a little deeper. James says that you cannot get what you want. But wait, that doesn't make sense. Yes, I can. If I want the truck, all I have to do is take out a second mortgage and buy it. But see, that's not what James is saying either. No, what he's saying is that truck won't actually satisfy you. Getting what we desire doesn't ever fully and finally satisfy our appetites. Just think about our appetite for food. Thanksgiving is coming up. Many of us will eat until we're so full that we feel like we will never need to eat again a day in our lives. But what will happen a few hours later? All of a sudden, we'll start getting hungry for that pecan pie. And yes, I said pecan pie because it's the best pie. If you disagree, you're wrong. Anyways, the point is, just a few hours after overly satisfying our desires, we'll get hungry again. Why? Because those desires, by nature, are never fully and finally satisfied. They're only ever temporarily fulfilled. This is the point James is making. Our envy won't be resolved by getting what we desire. No, in fact, it will actually do the opposite. It will lead to greater desires. The more we get, the more we will want. More stuff, more power, more status, more recognition, more success, more progress, more pleasure, more intimacy, more relationships, more security. And that's the envy trap that we get caught up in. When we indulge ourselves in these desires, it only leads to a bigger craving for more desires. C.S. Lewis points this out in his book, Mere Christianity. He says, appetites grow through indulgence, not neglect. Gluttons think about food just as much as starving people. And that gets to the heart of James's point. Our desires are not best dealt with by continually trying to satisfy them. So the question is, what do we do? How do we deal with those desires so we can rid ourselves of the envy that's rotting our bones and ruining our relationships? Well, James tells us, middle of verse 2. He says, you do not have because you do not ask God. Okay, now that's an interesting thought. James says, instead of bringing these desires to everyone else, try bringing them to God. Now, on the surface, this seems amazing. Like, wait, all we got to do is ask God? Got it, James. Instead of being jealous of someone else's full head of hair, I'll start asking God to regrow mine. Done. But wait, there's more to it than that. Look at verse 3. James says, when you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Okay, so it's about having the right motives when we ask. So let me get this straight. If I ask God to regrow my hair so I can look 10 years younger and think it will solve my self-esteem issues, is that the right motive? No? Well, can we at least give it a try just to make sure? Of course not. Why? Because like we've been saying, getting what we desire does not satisfy us. It only generates more desires. So what do? Well, here's the answer. We go to God, but not for our desires. We go to God with our desires. See the difference? If we go to God for our desires, then he's really just a genie in a bottle. But if we go to God with our desires, then he's more like a friend, a counselor, a good parent. And that's really the point. What James is saying is take your desires and place them at God's feet. Or to say it another way, be brutally honest with God about what it is you want, or what it is you feel you lack, or why it is you feel so empty and insufficient and insecure. Tell God about all those things that everyone else has, but you don't. Give him all those if-onlys that live in the back of your mind. If only I had better health. If only I was taller. If only I had more money. If only I had a spouse. If only I had kids. If only I owned my own home. Take all of that and give it to God. Here's why. Because God's the only one that can do anything about it, right? I mean, other people, they can't meet those needs. Other people's stuff can't make you happy. No, take your desires to God because God's the one that can do something about it. That's why I said be honest, be real, be genuine. It's okay to even be angry with God. Like, God, why haven't you met my desires? Why haven't you fulfilled these desires? Why didn't you make me prettier? Why didn't you make me healthier? Why didn't you make me smarter? Why didn't you make me more confident? Why didn't you give me better opportunities in life? Why didn't you give me a better family, a dad who cares, a mom who's more present? God, why did you give me all these desires and then not fulfill them? See, that's what it looks like to lay it at God's feet. It's not always pretty. It's not always clean. It's not always cute. No, it's real. It's raw. It's honest. Sometimes it's even ugly. But that's what we need to do with our envy, with these desires that are fueling our jealousy. We need to take it and lay it at God's feet. Pastor Andy Stanley, who wrote the book Enemies of the Heart, says that when we feel envy, what we're really feeling is this sense that God owes me. God owes me a better life, a better situation, a better outcome. That's really what's at the bottom of it all. We're not mad at our neighbor. No, we're mad at God because God could have done something about it. But we don't really think like that, and we especially don't talk like that because it sounds ridiculous. Even though we might feel deep down like God owes us something, we also know that God doesn't owe us anything at all. I mean, he literally sent his one and only son to die for us. How are we supposed to then tell him what we desire on top of that? So what we do instead is we take it out on others. We allow our envy to ruin relationships. Because at the end of the day, someone's got to pay for how we feel. But it doesn't have to be that way. Envy doesn't have to rot our bones and ruin our relationships anymore. Because we can take it to God. We can lay it at his feet. We can be honest, even if it's ugly. Hebrews 4:16 says, "So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most." Listen, God can handle it. God can handle our ugly. God can handle our angry, even when it's directed towards him. And here's the thing. When we go to him honestly, he doesn't get defensive. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't roll his eyes. He doesn't reject us. No, he listens and meets us in that feeling with grace and mercy. Why? Because God cares. Let me say that again, because it's so important. God cares. God cares about your unmet desires. 1 Peter 5:7 says, "Cast all your cares or all your anxieties on God because he cares for you." Do you believe that? Do you believe that God cares for you? Do you believe that those desires that are important to you are also important to God? Whether they're deep or shallow, big or small, do you believe that God cares about them? If you do, then do you also trust God to do something about them, even if it's not what you might do? Do you trust God that he will respond in a way that's ultimately best for you, even if it doesn't immediately satisfy you? See, that's what this all comes down to. It's not will we get everything we desire. No, it's will we trust God, even when we don't. The more we lean into that trust, the more we lean into that faith, the more we will free ourselves from the death grip of envy and find the peace to be content. Okay, now that's step one. We go to God with our desires. That's the internal work that we do. Now comes the external work. Once we go to God with our desires, how do we then restore and renew those relationships with the people who have what we desire? Well, about a month ago, we finished a series in the book of Romans, which deals a lot with relationships, specifically between people who are kind of in conflict with one another. And one really helpful practice that Paul, the author of Romans, suggests in chapter 12, verse 15, is to rejoice with those who rejoice. Let me say that again. Rejoice with those who rejoice. In other words, celebrate when other people have success. And see, that's our answer. That's how we ultimately remove jealousy from those relationships. We celebrate when others have success. Now, I get it. That might be a hard pill to swallow. Celebrating someone we're jealous of does not come naturally to us. The other day, I overheard my wife congratulating our youngest son about how well he played in his basketball game. And my other son, who's 11, looked over and out of pure jealousy said to his younger brother, "Good job beating little toddlers." Oh man, brothers can be so mean to each other, especially when jealousy creeps in. And don't feel bad for my youngest, by the way. He gives it right back. But I get it, because it's unnatural to celebrate others when they have success, especially in areas where we want what they got. Because here's the thing, there's this little lie that whispers in our minds that their success means our failure, or their gains means our losses. But we have to remind ourselves that that's not true. My friend Amy, who's a licensed therapist, says it this way. She says, by accepting others' wins and praising them, we actually feel good doing it, which triggers a sense of gratification within us as well. We start to realize that by applauding others' accomplishments, it doesn't actually diminish our ego, it enhances it. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Think of that person that you're jealous of, or maybe that group of people who you've kind of grown to resent. Instead of giving in to envy and allowing it to rot those relationships, can you try celebrating them? Just try it. If you don't believe me or the Apostle Paul or my friend Amy, who's a licensed therapist, try it for yourself. Next time you see that coworker kick butt at that project, tell them how amazing they did. Next time you see that friend go on your dream vacation, celebrate with them. Wish them the best. Next time you see that other parent's kid get Student of the Month for the third time this year, tell them what a good job they're doing as a mom or a dad. And if you feel resistance initially, remind yourself that their success doesn't mean you're a failure. Now, when we do this, it might feel manufactured at first. You might have to fake it till you make it. But eventually, our feelings will follow our actions. Celebration will become a pattern, a new habit, and it will replace the habit of envy that's rotting our hearts and ruining relationships. And here's the best news of all. It will make room for love. Love for others, and really love for ourselves. I'll close with one more story or confession. As a pastor, I used to really struggle with whether or not I was a good teacher. I don't really know where this came from. I'm assuming that a lot of public communicators might struggle with this, but it caused me to become deeply insecure and eventually compare myself to other teachers. This led to all sorts of jealousy and eventually resentment in my heart. I'd constantly put other teachers down or poke holes in their style of teaching or the content that they used just to justify that jealousy that lived inside me. Well, the problem was all that jealousy and comparison, it did nothing to solve the insecurity that I felt. No, it actually made it a lot worse because my judgment of everyone else was really just a reflection of my judgment towards myself. So about 5 years ago, I decided to take Paul's words in Romans 12:15 seriously. I decided I would replace my envy with celebration. Rejoice with those who rejoice. And so I did. Every time I heard another pastor give a great message, I made it a point to tell them. I'd call them, send them a message, shake their hand, give them a high five, write them a note, whatever. At first, it was hard. I had to kind of fake it a little bit. It felt inauthentic because my envy still wanted to take them down. But eventually, it began to get easier and easier, and ultimately, it became a habit that helped heal my heart. Because over time, what happened is celebrating others actually began to help me celebrate myself. And not just the highlights. It helped me come to peace with who I am and the gifts and the talents and the strengths that God gave me as a pastor and as a teacher. It helped me realize that I'm enough just how I am, that I don't have to be somebody else, that I don't have to have more or be more in order to be validated. And let me tell you, there's no greater feeling in the world than being content in who you are and how God's created you to be. It changes everything. Now when I get to talk in front of people, I'm not trying to prove myself. I can just freely be myself. And see, that's why all this matters. All these enemies of the heart we've talked about over the past 4 times together, anger, fear, greed, envy, all of these emotions, if they go unchecked in our hearts, they keep us from being ourselves. They keep us from being content with who God created us to be. And that keeps us from loving the very people that God has put in our lives to love, starting with the people closest to us, our family, our friends, our kids, our parents, our siblings, our neighbors. See, that's what's at stake, our hearts and our relationships. So let me close our time together by asking us one final question. Is there an enemy that's living in your heart? If so, is it time that you take action? Is it time that you do something about it? If not for your own sake, then how about for the sake of those you love most? Let's pray. God, thank you for today. Thank you for giving us the antidote, not just to envy, but to all of these negative emotions that creep into our hearts and compete for control of our lives and our relationships. Thank you for showing us how this is done with your very life, for coming to this earth and showing us how to live graciously and how to celebrate others' success even when it hurts us inside. Yeah, thank you for showing the way. Thank you for providing a way, and I pray now for the courage for us to follow your example and your truth for our sake and for the sake of those closest to us. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Hey, wait, before you go, 3 things. First, consider becoming one of Cornerstone Fellowship's financial partners. Your donations will ensure that you'll be able to continue enjoying helpful and hopefully life-changing messages like the one you just watched. And then number 2, please share the link to this message with anyone who you know needs it or will be blessed by it, or by posting the link to your own personal social media platforms, all of them. And finally, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you'll be alerted whenever we post more content. Thanks for watching.